The day I was handed an eviction notice from the very house I built brick by brick, I felt something inside me break in a way that no words could fully capture. My hand shook as I held the paper, the letters swimming before my eyes, and for a moment I wondered if this was some cruel prank. But it wasn't. It was legal, official, and stamped with the very signature of the boy I had raised as my son, the same boy I had carried home from the hospital 2 decades earlier when fate had told me I could never have children of my own. Before I tell you everything, let me ask, have you ever poured every ounce of your love, your time, your savings into someone, only for them to turn around and throw you out like a stranger? If you have, then you already know the cold fire burning in my chest that night. My name is Daniel, and for most of my life I believed my greatest blessing was becoming a father, even if it wasn't by blood. You see, when my wife and I first learned we couldn't have children, it shattered me. The doctors spoke in clinical terms, but all I heard was the finality: I would never pass on my name, my eyes, my laugh. For weeks I walked like a ghost, avoiding baby aisles in stores, pretending not to notice the way my wife's smile faltered every time she saw a stroller. But then came a miracle, not in the form of sudden fertility, but in the paperwork of a small orphanage that asked if we would consider adoption. I didn't hesitate. The moment I held that baby boy in my arms, wrapped in a faded blue blanket, I knew my purpose had shifted forever. I wasn't his by blood, but I was his by choice, and to me that was even stronger. For years, everything I did revolved around giving him the life I never had. I worked double shifts on construction sites, my back aching from carrying cement blocks, my hands blistered from endless hours with the hammer, but every time I came home and saw his smile, every bruise and callus felt like a badge of honor. Birthdays were celebrated with cakes far too expensive for our modest income, but I didn't care. I saved for his education, scrimped and sacrificed so he could attend a good school, even if it meant wearing the same pair of boots until the soles nearly fell off. And for a time I thought my love was enough. But something began to change as he grew older. Where once he called me Dad, he started saying him or the old man when talking to friends. He grew embarrassed of me, of my rough hands and simple clothes, especially when his classmates' fathers wore suits and drove shiny cars. I brushed it off as teenage rebellion, the kind all kids go through, and told myself he'd come back around. I kept giving, kept sacrificing, hoping that one day he'd see the truth of what family really meant. Then, when he turned 18, a lawyer friend suggested I draft a will or some kind of document to secure his future. I didn't hesitate. I thought that signing over the house, the land, and the small savings I had would make him feel secure, would show him without a shadow of doubt that he was my son, my heir, my everything. He hugged me that night with tears in his eyes, whispering, "I'll take care of you forever, Dad." Those words seared into my heart. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. But 2 years later, on a cold morning when my bones already ached from age, he handed me a crisp envelope. Inside was the eviction notice, stamped, signed, undeniable. "You've had your time here," he said flatly, not even meeting my eyes. "It's my house now. I need my own space. You should find somewhere else to go." I can't describe the silence that followed, the way the walls I had painted, the floors I had laid, the roof I had repaired through storms, all of it seemed to close in and mock me. This wasn't just a house. It was the container of every sacrifice I had made, and now I was being pushed out like an unwanted guest. That night I sat outside on the steps with my old jacket wrapped around me, listening to the wind whistle through the trees, wondering where I would go. My wife had passed years earlier, leaving me with only memories and the echo of her laughter in these halls. Relatives had long since turned their backs, some out of distance, others out of bitterness. I was alone. And as the lights inside flicked on, I caught a glimpse of him moving through the living room, already rearranging furniture as if I had never existed. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife. I thought about all the mornings I had carried him to school on my shoulders, the nights I had stayed awake worrying about his fevers, the times I had gone hungry so he could eat. And this was the thanks I received, my own son, my chosen son, throwing me out like trash. For a while, I almost gave up. There were moments I thought of just walking away, disappearing into some corner of the city where no one knew me, letting time swallow me whole. But fate, it seems, had one more twist waiting for me. One night, as I sat on the curb outside the house, a neighbor named Victor walked by. He was an older man, kind-eyed, the type who noticed things others didn't. He paused, looked at me shivering under the porch light, and asked softly, "Why are you out here, Daniel?" At first I lied, said I was just getting some air. But the weight of the truth pressed too heavy on my chest, and the words tumbled out. My son had evicted me, the house was no longer mine, and I had nowhere to go. Victor listened, his brow furrowing deeper with each word. Then he placed a hand on my shoulder and said something that sparked a flicker of resolve I thought I had lost forever. "You can't let him erase your life like this. A piece of paper may have his name on it, but your blood, your sweat, your love built this home. That counts for something, Daniel. More than he realizes." His words lit a fire in me. For the first time since receiving that notice, I felt a pulse of determination. Maybe I had been too quick to surrender, too willing to let betrayal write the final chapter of my life. But not anymore. Victor wasn't just offering sympathy that night, he offered me a lifeline. He knew a young lawyer who sometimes worked pro bono cases, especially for those who had been wronged in ways money couldn't easily measure. At first I resisted. What good would it do? My name was no longer on the deed, my signature was there in black ink, sealing my fate. But Victor's eyes didn't waver, and something about his calm certainty convinced me to try. The very next week I sat in a cramped office lined with dusty law books, my calloused hands clutching a paper cup of bitter coffee while a man in his 30s listened to my story. His name was Alex, and as soon as I finished speaking, he leaned forward and said, "I grew up in a group home. I know what it feels like to have nothing but the promise of someone's love. If you raised him, sacrificed everything, and he turned his back on you, then this isn't just about property. This is about justice. And we're going to get it." For the first time in weeks, I felt hope. Alex asked me to bring everything I could, old receipts, bills, photos, journals, anything that showed the years of devotion I had poured into my son. That night I dug through boxes in the attic, my hands trembling as I uncovered decades of quiet evidence. There were medical bills for his childhood fevers, receipts for birthday cakes, invoices from the private school I had paid for even when it meant pawning my watch. There were faded photographs of me kneeling beside him at science fairs, cheering in the stands at soccer games, lifting him on my shoulders so he could see fireworks on the 4th of July. And then, in a drawer I hadn't opened in years, I found my late wife's journal. Her delicate handwriting spilled across the pages, recounting sleepless nights spent by his bedside, how proud she was of the boy we raised, and how much she loved seeing me as a father. One line in particular stopped me cold. "Daniel works himself to the bone every day, but when he looks at our son, it's as if none of the pain matters. That boy is his whole world." My throat tightened as I packed everything into a box. This was more than paperwork. This was the story of a man who had given everything. When Alex saw it all spread out across his desk, he nodded slowly. "This is powerful," he said. "It shows intent, devotion, years of sacrifice. We can build a case. And I think I know how." Meanwhile, my son, no, I struggled to even call him that anymore, grew bolder. He began changing the locks on the house even before the eviction notice officially took effect, smirking when I confronted him. "It's called moving on," he said coldly. "You should try it." Neighbors began to notice the way he barked orders at me, the way he strutted around as though he had earned the roof over his head. And yet I kept my silence, my anger simmering quietly, because Alex had warned me, let him expose himself. The more arrogant he became, the stronger our position would be. Weeks turned into months, and during that time Alex and I built a wall of evidence. He tracked down witnesses, teachers who remembered me attending every parent meeting, a doctor who recalled how I always paid in cash when insurance fell short, even a local store owner who remembered me buying winter coats for a growing boy while wearing my own threadbare jacket year after year. Each piece was another nail in the coffin of my son's lies. But the cruelty didn't stop. One afternoon, while I was fixing the fence outside, he marched up with two of his friends and shouted loud enough for half the street to hear, "Why don't you just leave already? You're pathetic. This isn't your place anymore. Everyone knows it." His friends laughed, their voices dripping with contempt, and though my hands clenched around the hammer I was holding, I said nothing. Instead, I turned back to the fence, hammering slowly, each strike a promise to myself that his words would not be the final chapter. Later, Alex smiled when I told him. "Good. Let him keep showing the world who he really is. By the time we're done, no one will doubt who sacrificed and who betrayed." Still, there were nights when despair crept in, when I lay awake in the small cot Victor had set up in his shed, staring at the ceiling and wondering how everything had gone so wrong. I remembered the boy I once carried on my shoulders, the way he used to wrap his small arms around my neck and whisper, "I love you, Dad." I wondered if that boy had ever really existed, or if I had just imagined him. Yet every time I considered giving up, I opened my wife's journal, read her words again, and felt her spirit urging me forward. One evening, Alex called with news that made my heart race. "We found something extraordinary," he said. "The adoption papers from the hospital. They're not just a record of guardianship. They include a clause naming you as lifelong guardian and benefactor. It doesn't transfer property rights automatically. It recognizes your role as father, legally." My breath caught. "So he can't just erase me with a signature?" "Not if we present this the right way," Alex replied firmly. "This, combined with everything else, builds a case that what he's done is exploitation and bad faith. He may have a piece of paper with his name on the deed, but we have the story of 20 years of sacrifice, and the law isn't blind to that." Hope flared again, but it was tempered with fear. What if the court didn't care? What if all my love, all my years, were brushed aside as sentiment with no legal weight? Alex must have sensed my doubt, because he added, "Daniel, sometimes the law follows cold logic. But sometimes it recognizes humanity. And with your story, I believe humanity will win." From that day forward, I walked a little taller. Every sneer from my son, every cruel laugh, every slammed door became fuel for the fire. He thought he had beaten me, thought I was broken and powerless. But what he didn't know was that I was gathering an army of truth, one receipt, one witness, one memory at a time. The stage was being set, and soon, the roles would reverse. He would stand exposed, and the world would see who had truly built that home, not with ink on a page, but with a lifetime of love and sacrifice. The morning of the hearing I pressed the only good shirt I had and polished my boots until I could almost see my hollow eyes in the scuffed leather, then walked to the courthouse with Victor at my side, the winter air sharp enough to sting but not sharp enough to numb the steady drum of my heart. My son arrived late, swagger in each step, flanked by two friends who wore smirks like medals. When he saw me he didn't nod, didn't look, just brushed past as if I were a stranger on a sidewalk he'd never walk again. Inside, the room smelled like paper and coffee and effort. A judge with kind but tired eyes took the bench, the clerk read the case, and the opposing lawyer, slick suit, wedding band glow, voice like a polished blade, rose to frame me as the problem, a man who had, of his own free will, gifted his property to a grateful young adult and then refused to accept the consequences of his generosity. He called it an unfortunate emotional entanglement and asked the court to restore order by enforcing the eviction and awarding fees for my obstruction. I watched my son lean back, ankle over knee, the picture of bored confidence, and for a breath I almost believed I had already lost. Then Alex stood. He didn't posture. He didn't pound. He let the room fall quiet, and when he finally spoke his words were simple and heavy as a keystone. "This," he said, "is not a case about a man refusing to let go. This is a case about a man who gave everything, time, money, care, identity, to a boy he made his son by choice and by law, and about a young man who took that love, translated it into paper, and tried to convert it into power." He gestured for me to place the first box on the table. Out came the receipts, medical bills stamped paid, tuition invoices initialed in my cramped hand, grocery tallies that climbed during growth spurts, the lease extensions I signed so the boy could finish a season with his team near our school. Each item had a date, a dollar amount, a purpose, a story, and as Alex walked the court through them the room changed. The paper stopped being paper and became years. He didn't let the pathos carry him away. He anchored each exhibit to law, intent, reliance, implied covenant of good faith, words that sounded like scaffolds holding up the truth. The opposing counsel objected when Alex introduced my wife's journal, citing hearsay. Alex conceded to a narrowed scope, using it not for the truth of assertions but to establish state of mind and contemporaneous observations. The judge allowed limited excerpts. Alex did not read the flowery lines, only the austere ones, the dates she recorded my double shifts, the notations of cash payments when insurance denied coverage, the entry where she wrote that we would never let this child feel like a guest. The opposing counsel tried to yawn his objections into the record, the judge overruled 2, sustained 1, and the drumbeat continued. Then Alex produced the adoption file. He handled it like it weighed 100 pounds. He turned to the judge and noted that the document did not transfer title to anything, it did something deeper. It recognized me as a lifelong guardian and benefactor, the legal father, with obligations I had honored without fail. He pointed to the clause acknowledging continuing duty of support and care, and then to a notation in the margin where a social worker had handwritten, 20 years ago, prospective father present daily, assumes all medical decisions. The opposing counsel asked to see it, flipped, sniffed, said it was touching but irrelevant. Alex answered in that same quiet tone that the document spoke not to sentimentality but to the nature of the relationship my son had exploited when he induced me to sign over the deed, a transaction executed in reliance on promises of continued cohabitation and care. Reliance, inducement, bad faith. The words landed like measured blows. When it was their turn, the opposing counsel called my son. He straightened his collar, took the oath, and told a story that had no rough edges. He was grateful, yes, but I had insisted on gifting the house to ensure a clean succession. I was becoming forgetful, he said, prone to dramatic episodes, and he needed stability. He called me Daniel, never Dad. He said I had a room if I wanted it, but that I had grown combative when he suggested boundaries. He never raised his voice. He never wavered. He sounded like a podcast guest discussing minimalism. Alex rose for cross and did not ask a question for a full 5 seconds. Then he slid a birthday card from 3 years ago across the rail, the one with the cheap gold foil I had saved because it said "to the best dad." My son blinked, the smallest crack. I bought that because the store was out of generic cards, he said. Alex didn't challenge the absurdity, he let it hang, then moved on. Did you, on the night the deed transferred, say to Daniel, "I will take care of you for the rest of your life"? No. Did you ever text that sentiment? No. No further questions. He hadn't needed the card to prove a promise, he needed the denial. When my son stepped down, he walked past me without looking. His friends were not smiling now. Alex called the doctor who had treated the boy's childhood asthma. She remembered me arriving at dawn after night shifts, cash in hand. He called the grocer who kept a tab for me during layoffs. He called a soccer coach who described me repairing goals with my own wire so the team could play when the budget ran dry. Each witness gave a sliver, and together they formed a pane of glass so clear you could see the shape of a life through it. Then Alex said he had one more witness. The door at the back opened, and a woman in her 70s entered, posture straight, eyes gentle and tired in the way of people who have seen too much and kept going anyway. She took the oath, folded her hands, and said her name was Elena. I was a nurse, she said softly, on the ward the day a tiny boy was brought in with no one to claim him. She glanced at me and smiled with recognition that made my throat tighten. He came every single day. This man. He wasn't assigned. He wasn't paid. He came because he could not bear the thought of that baby being alone. I remember the way he held the child like something both breakable and indestructible. I remember him asking the kind of questions real parents ask, about fevers, about feeding, about night terrors. I remember the social worker telling me that the paperwork would take time and him answering, "Time I have. That boy I cannot lose." The opposing counsel objected, again on hearsay. Alex narrowed the questions to Elena's direct observations, and she continued. "You also made a record," Alex said gently. "A note." She nodded. The hospital used to let staff attach a brief note to adoption files when a staff member had significant observation. It was an old practice. I wrote one. She unfolded a yellowed copy and read, voice wavering only once. Prospective adoptive father present daily, assumes emotional and practical care, refers to child as son, child calms in his arms. The room did not breathe for a moment. The opposing counsel asked whether she had been compensated or contacted by me. She said no, that a lawyer had found her through archived schedules and that she came because she remembered. He tried to puncture the moment by suggesting memory is fallible. She smiled sadly. "I have forgotten many things in 50 years, she said. "But I do not forget the people who hold abandoned babies like that." When she stepped down, my son's foot kept tapping the carpet, a nerve firing that he couldn't quiet. The judge called for a brief recess. In the hallway, Victor squeezed my shoulder. "Heard the truth, they did," he murmured. My son's friends had vanished. He stood with the opposing counsel, jaw tight, voice low and sibilant, and for the first time since the notice I saw something I had not seen on his face, uncertainty. Back in the courtroom, the judge did not immediately rule. Instead he spoke slowly, as if testing each word on the air before letting it fall. He said the transfer of property was real and could not be undone on mere regret. He said the court was not in the business of punishing ingratitude. Then he paused and added that the law also recognizes doctrines that prevent the abuse of relationships of trust, especially when a transfer is procured under circumstances implying ongoing mutual obligations. He referenced equitable remedies he could consider: constructive trusts, life estates, partition in kind, terms that sounded like tools a careful craftsman might use to fix something cracked without shattering it. The opposing counsel tried to press for immediate enforcement of the eviction. The judge denied it, citing sufficient showing to maintain the status quo until final orders. My son stood, unable to help himself. "How long do I have to wait?" he burst out. "He's not," he stopped, swallowed the word that would have finished the sentence the way he had been finishing it for 2 years. The judge's gaze sharpened. "You will address this court with respect," he said evenly. "And you will remember that the man you are speaking about is the person who raised you." Silence again. In that hush I felt something shift inside me, not triumph, not yet, but the ending of one weather pattern and the beginning of another. After arguments, the judge set a date for final orders and strongly encouraged the parties to confer about a settlement that would reflect the realities established today. As people filed out, my son finally looked at me. For a heartbeat there was the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the one who cried when he fell and then climbed back on because I told him he could. Then that boy vanished like breath on glass. He turned away. In the corridor, Alex exhaled for the first time all day. "We're not done," he said, "but you felt it too." I nodded. I did. He glanced at the closed courtroom door. "He thinks you're asking for charity." "We're not. We're asserting the truth written in the life you lived." "The law can read that, Daniel." It did today. That night I returned to Victor's place and lay on the cot listening to the old pipes hum, the house a living thing settling into its bones, and I realized I was no longer afraid of the final ruling. Whatever the judge decided, I had reclaimed something my son could not sign away: my name in the story of that house, my place in the story of that boy, my right to stand up and say, "I built this with my hands and my heart, and I will not be erased." The final hearing came 3 weeks later, and during those nights I barely slept, lying on Victor's cot listening to the creak of his old house while my mind played every possibility, from triumph to total ruin. Alex told me to stay calm, to trust the evidence, to remember that truth had a way of settling even when men tried to bury it. I walked into the courthouse that morning with my chest tight, my palms damp, my boots still polished though the shine had dulled from wear. My son was already there, his face pale but his jaw set, his expensive jacket hanging off his shoulders as though it had been borrowed from someone with broader shoulders and a steadier heart. The judge entered, the room rose, and then silence fell, the kind of silence that makes every cough sound like thunder. The judge spoke slowly, carefully, laying out the framework of the law. He acknowledged the deed transfer, the legal weight of my signature, the importance of property rights. For a moment, despair clawed at my chest. But then his tone shifted, firm but not unkind, as he cited principles older than the ink on that deed, principles of equity, of fairness, of preventing exploitation when trust is twisted into a weapon. He described my son's conduct as a fundamental breach of filial obligation, words I never expected to hear in a courtroom, and as he said them my son's head dropped, eyes fixed on the desk. The judge announced his ruling: the house would be partitioned, half secured to me for life, an unbreakable right to reside without interference, the other half formally his. No eviction, no forced departure, no power to erase me. Furthermore, the court imposed restrictions. Any attempt to harass or expel me again would result in contempt and potential forfeiture of his claim. My knees nearly buckled with relief, and I gripped the table to steady myself. My son's lawyer sputtered objections, citing precedent, but the judge cut him off. "This case is not only about statutes," he said, "it is about the spirit of justice. And justice recognizes the man who built a home with sweat and devotion cannot be cast out by the very person who benefited from it." In that moment, I felt something return to me, not just the right to live under that roof, but the dignity that had been stripped away piece by piece since the day of the eviction notice. Outside the courthouse, cameras from a local news station waited. I hadn't known anyone cared, but apparently the story of a father nearly abandoned by the son he raised had touched a nerve. Reporters asked questions, microphones thrust forward, but I only said one sentence: "Love is not weakness, but betrayal is." Then I turned and walked away. That evening, when I stepped back into the house, I did so not as a guest, not as a tolerated relic of the past, but as the rightful occupant. My son was there, leaning against the wall, eyes dark, lips pressed into a thin line. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of his coldness. "This is still my house," he muttered. I looked him straight in the eye and answered, "And it will always be mine, because I built it, not with deeds, but with 20 years of nights and mornings you'll never erase." He didn't reply. He turned away and went upstairs, the sound of his footsteps hollow on the floorboards. In the days that followed, the tension was unbearable, and eventually he moved out, unable to stand the weight of a truth too heavy for his fragile pride. He left no note, no apology, just silence. At first, that silence hurt. But then, slowly, it began to heal. Neighbors who had watched everything unfold started stopping by, bringing bread, sitting with me on the porch. Victor visited daily, grinning as if he had personally delivered justice with his own hands. Alex checked in, reminding me that I had not just survived, I had fought back with strategy, receipts, patience, and dignity. And every night, before bed, I opened my wife's journal to the pages where she had written of our little boy, of my sacrifices, of our love. I read those words like scripture, letting them remind me that though the boy we raised had lost his way, I had never lost mine. One afternoon, I found an old photograph tucked between the pages, a picture of me holding him as a toddler, his tiny hands gripping my beard, his smile wide and innocent. I stared at it for a long time, and instead of anger, I felt something else: sorrow, yes, but also peace. I realized I could forgive without forgetting, move forward without erasing the lessons carved into me by pain. My home, once nearly taken from me, became once again a sanctuary, not because of walls or deeds, but because of resilience. And as I sat there in the quiet, I thought of all the people who might be watching my story unfold, and I wanted them to know, family is not defined by blood or by papers, it is defined by love, sacrifice, and respect. Without those, a house is just wood and stone. With them, it is unshakable. So if you've ever been betrayed by the very people you gave everything to, if you've ever faced your breaking point and wondered whether you had the strength to fight back, let my story be proof: you do. You have more strength than you know. And sometimes, revenge isn't about rage or destruction. Sometimes it's about standing tall, holding your receipts, and reclaiming the dignity that no one has the right to take. If you've ever had your own breaking point with family, share it in the comments. Your story might be the one that saves someone else from believing they are powerless. Because we are never powerless. Not when we choose to rise.